The chandeliers sparkled above polished marble floors as the guests gathered in the grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate, a sprawling English countryside mansion that seemed to gleam brighter than usual that evening. Emma, in a floor-length emerald gown that shimmered with every movement, glided through the room with elegance and ease. At 32, she exuded the kind of classic beauty that drew admiration without trying. Her smile was soft, gracious, the kind that came not from vanity, but from quiet confidence, and tonight, from hope. It was their 10th wedding anniversary, a milestone she had dreamt of celebrating with love and pride. After months of emotional distance and cold silences, Charles had finally begun coming home early again, speaking more gently, showing flickers of the man she had fallen in love with. For the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to believe they were on the mend. The guests, London's elite, business magnates, and socialites, mingled with champagne flutes in hand, their eyes darting across the opulence of the hall. Everyone knew this event was more than just an anniversary. It was a statement of unity, a public declaration that Charles Bennet, the steel-hearted billionaire of finance and scandal, and Emma Bennet, the once quiet wife in the background, were still standing strong together. Emma had poured her soul into planning every detail, from the string quartet playing their wedding song to the customized floral arrangements in her favorite ivory peonies. The mansion itself was glowing with soft golden light, casting a warm spell on the cool evening air. She had made sure of it all, determined to reclaim their bond, to bring them back to the place they once stood, together. But as she turned to glance at Charles, standing near the head table with a glass of Bordeaux in hand, something in his posture gave her pause. He wasn't smiling. In fact, his gaze seemed distracted, almost bored. Emma followed his line of sight instinctively and her heart skipped. Near the edge of the ballroom, amidst a group of unfamiliar faces, stood a young woman, tall, slender, with fiery red hair cascading down her back. She was laughing, her head thrown back with confidence far beyond her years. She couldn't have been more than 24. Emma blinked, trying to shake the unease rising in her chest. Maybe she was an assistant? A model for one of Charles's clients? But then Charles's eyes met hers again, not Emma's, but the young woman's, and this time, the glance lingered. Emma's fingers tightened slightly around her champagne glass, though her face remained calm. The chatter around her continued, someone complimenting the food, another guest recounting a holiday in Monaco, but for Emma, the world had slowed. That look, the quiet exchange between her husband and the stranger, felt like a whisper through the crowd. Something was wrong. The air shifted, charged, electric, and though no one else seemed to notice it, Emma felt it in her bones. The night had only just begun, but already, she could sense that it would not end the way she had imagined. The clinking of crystal glasses echoed gently through the ballroom as Charles rose to speak, his tall frame commanding attention. A hush fell over the crowd. Emma, still glowing from welcoming guests and receiving warm anniversary wishes, turned toward her husband with an expectant smile. It was time for the toast, the moment she believed would seal their renewal, their second beginning. Charles held his glass aloft and offered a thin smile that never reached his eyes. To 10 years, he said, voice steady but void of warmth. 10 years of memories. A few polite laughs fluttered through the room, uncertain but obliging. Emma's brows lifted slightly at the odd choice of words, but she clutched her own glass and leaned in, waiting for more. Then came the shift, cold, clinical, and calculated. And tonight, I want to share something important. Emma and I have decided to go our separate ways. The silence that followed was absolute. 1,000 thoughts raced behind the stunned faces in the crowd. Emma stood motionless, her glass still raised, her smile frozen in place. She blinked once, slowly, as though time had stalled. Whispers began rippling at the edges of the room like small waves before a storm. A few guests glanced nervously at each other, unsure if this was a joke, a performance, or some sort of publicity stunt. Charles continued without emotion, as if he were reading from a quarterly report. It's been a journey, and I'll always respect what we had. But I've found someone who truly understands me now. Someone who reignites the passion I thought I had lost. His voice softened just slightly, mock tenderness that felt like acid poured into Emma's ears. Her name is Sienna. Emma could feel the blood draining from her face. The room, once filled with warmth and elegance, now felt suffocating. The chandeliers, once twinkling with charm, now felt blinding. A tall figure emerged from the corner, Sienna, smiling confidently as if she belonged there, as if she hadn't just shattered a woman's life in front of 200 people. Emma's heart pounded against her ribs. She wanted to move, to speak, to scream, but she couldn't. She was cemented in place, betrayed, ridiculed, and discarded, all under the scrutiny of flashing cameras and champagne toasts. It wasn't just the announcement that broke her, it was the way he said it. Cold. Public. As though their decade together had been little more than a footnote in his story. Gasps and murmurs filled the room now, the buzz of scandal already racing through the air like wildfire. Some guests avoided eye contact, some stared at Emma with pity, and others, those hungry for drama, watched with eager fascination. Charles stepped down from the small stage and walked directly toward Sienna, placing a hand on her lower back as if sealing the betrayal with a touch. Emma turned her head slowly, forcing herself to meet his eyes. There was no regret in them, only resolve. He had made his choice, and he didn't care who burned in the process. Within an hour, Emma was no longer welcome in the home she had poured her heart into for 10 years. Charles had given instructions. Staff, unsure and ashamed, followed orders. Her belongings were hastily gathered into a single suitcase. The rest would be sent later. She walked out of the mansion in silence, heels clicking against the marble like a metronome marking the end of a symphony she hadn't realized was over. The night was cold, the stars above indifferent. A sleek black car waited at the foot of the drive, and as the door closed behind her, she felt it, not just heartbreak, but complete erasure. Emma Bennett, the devoted wife, had been dismissed like an unwanted guest from her own life. The old stone cottage sat quietly at the edge of the Cotswolds, tucked between weeping willows and winding country roads. It hadn't seen life in years, not since Emma's grandmother passed away and left it to her, the one place untouched by opulence, expectations, or heartbreak. Now, it became her sanctuary, the only refuge after the storm that had swallowed her world whole. When she arrived in the dead of night, clutching the handle of her single suitcase, there was no welcome committee, no soft lights or staff waiting to ease her burden. There was only dust, cold air, and the echoes of her grandmother's old rocking chair creaking in the corner. Emma stepped inside, shut the door, and let the silence wrap around her like a shroud. The first days passed in a haze. She didn't speak. She didn't eat much. Her perfectly styled hair turned wild, her manicured hands shook when she made tea she never drank. She lay on the old floral couch wrapped in a worn-out blanket, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her phone rang, calls, texts, gossip, but she let them all go unanswered. The world was moving on, but she was suspended in time. The woman she had been, the gracious hostess, the stylish wife, the power behind the throne, had been ripped away. What was left behind was hollow. But even in stillness, the mind does not sleep. Flashbacks came in fragments, uninvited and cruel. She remembered the long nights sitting beside Charles as he built his empire from the ground up, how she stayed up late sorting paperwork, rewriting investor pitches, booking flights, proofing speeches. She remembered the evenings she canceled her own gallery showings, shelving her passion for design so she could accompany him to corporate events. Every victory they'd had, she had been there, silently shaping the foundation he now stood on. And yet, when it came time to thank her, he didn't just forget, he discarded. He had used her strength to build his success, and when he no longer needed her, he traded her in like a worn-out suit. The pain of it was sharp, real, unbearable. Then, on the 5th day, something changed. Emma had wandered into the village to buy bread and milk. As she stood at the corner shop's till, her eyes caught the bold black letters of a tabloid on the stand. Billionaire Charles Bennett and model Sienna Evans engaged. Beneath it was a glossy photo of the two, Charles in a tuxedo, Sienna in a shimmering gold dress, her hand flaunting a diamond the size of a marble. Emma felt the weight of the image hit her chest. But instead of tears, something else surged, a heat, a rush, a fire. Not jealousy. Not heartbreak. Something older, Deeper. Fury. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that settles quietly, with precision. Her breath steadied. Her spine straightened. And just like that, a switch flipped. Emma returned to the cottage that evening with a new presence in her step. The pity was gone. The self-blame, buried. She lit the fireplace, pulled out her grandmother's worn notebooks, and began scribbling thoughts, plans, visions. Her hands shook at first, but slowly, the lines became clearer. The Emma who had built a man's empire in the shadows was gone. Now, she would build her own, and this time, in the light. No more crying. No more silence. Charles had taken her home, her pride, and her love. But he had unknowingly gifted her something far more dangerous, purpose. The next morning, Emma rose with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. The heartbreak hadn't vanished, but it no longer held her hostage. She brewed a strong pot of coffee and sat by the window of the old cottage, flipping through her grandmother's notebooks. Inside were scraps of fabric swatches, sketches of old English rooms, and musings about beauty, heritage, and soul. That spark of design, the one Emma had buried for a decade while playing the perfect wife, was flickering back to life. She dug through her own boxes, unearthing her old university portfolio filled with designs that once earned her top honors. Pages of color palettes, layered textures, and space transformations. Somewhere between heartbreak and healing, her identity as a designer began to re-emerge. She needed a lifeline to launch it, and she knew exactly who to call. She hadn't spoken to Claire Matthews in years, not since university. Back then, Claire had been the scrappy business mind to Emma's artistic eye, always pitching startups between lectures. Now, she was a powerhouse venture capitalist in London with a reputation for spotting brilliance before it exploded. Emma hesitated before dialing, unsure if their old bond still meant something. But when Claire answered, her voice brightened with genuine warmth. They met 2 days later at a quiet cafe in Mayfair, and over cups of Earl Grey and hesitant laughter, Emma shared her story. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She pitched. She told Claire about the idea, an ultra-luxury interior design house blending British heritage with modern elegance. A brand that didn't just decorate homes, but told stories through space. Claire listened carefully, then smiled. "I always knew you had fire, Em. Let's make the world see it." What followed was a whirlwind. Emma poured herself into the work with a kind of hunger only betrayal could sharpen. She reactivated her old network, former classmates who were now architects, stylists, boutique artisans, and gallery owners. She studied market trends, hired a branding expert, and sketched day and night by the fire. Claire funded the initial capital, and together they chose the name, House of Illyria, derived from Emma's grandmother's middle name. She launched with a small digital portfolio, showcasing reimagined cottages, London lofts, and heritage townhomes, all done in her signature layered, soulful style. The hustle wasn't glamorous. She faced skeptics, men who scoffed at a newly single woman trying to enter a saturated market, others who assumed she was riding on Charles's coattails. There were projects that went over budget, clients who ghosted, and late nights filled with doubt. But Emma didn't stop. She couldn't. Every time she was dismissed or underestimated, she worked harder. She returned emails at 3 a.m., personally sourced vintage furnishings from remote villages, and learned to negotiate like a warrior. Her resilience became her armor. And then, the shift happened. A client, a minor actress, posted a TikTok tour of her home redesigned by Emma. The video went viral overnight. The blend of regal design with modern comfort stunned viewers. Comments flooded in asking, "Who designed this?" Emma's Instagram, once dormant, began gaining followers by the thousands. Journalists reached out for interviews. Lifestyle bloggers wrote features titled "The Woman Who Turned Heartbreak into High Design." Emma's name, her face, her story, it was suddenly everywhere. Through it all, she remained poised. Always in tailored blazers and silk scarves, never betraying the storm she had risen from. Her elegance became her signature, her quiet confidence her superpower. House of Illyria became more than a brand, it became a symbol of reinvention. Emma had been erased, humiliated, discarded. But now, the world was watching, and this time, they were seeing her for who she truly was. Not as Charles Bennett's ex-wife, but as Emma Illyria, the woman who built beauty from ashes. Sienna stepped into the grand marble foyer of the Whitmore estate with the excitement of someone who believed she had won. The sweeping staircase, the glittering chandeliers, the sprawling gardens, it was all hers now. Or at least, that's what she thought. Within days of moving in, she began transforming the mansion into a personal playground. Classic English art was replaced with neon installations. The antique grand piano in the parlor was shoved aside to make room for a DJ booth. Emma's carefully curated floral arrangements and subtle decor gave way to velvet drapes, loud colors, and the overbearing scent of designer candles that clashed with the home's original charm. Sienna wasted no time making her mark, hosting lavish parties every weekend, complete with fashion influencers, club promoters, and a constant stream of camera flashes. The once elegant estate became a scene of chaos, heels clacking across marble floors, champagne sprayed into fountains, and music that pulsed through the walls until dawn. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. The guests she invited may have had millions of followers, but they lacked grace. They spilled wine on heirloom rugs, mistook staff for waiters, and giggled too loudly at Charles's expense. The London elite, once frequent guests of the Bennets, began declining invitations. The mansion was no longer a symbol of refined power, it had become a spectacle. Charles watched it all from a growing distance. At first, he tried to tell himself this chaos was youth, excitement, exactly what he needed after years of cold routines and rigid expectations. But something about it all felt off. Sienna didn't understand discretion. She talked too much at business dinners, posted photos of private meetings, and offered opinions where she had no knowledge. She wanted to be seen, not to build. Charles began to miss the quiet steadiness Emma brought to his life, the way she anticipated his needs before he voiced them, how she never needed attention to command a room. He remembered the way Emma could diffuse a tense boardroom with a single word, how she carried herself with a dignity that could not be bought. Meanwhile, Sienna felt the shift. She noticed how Charles barely touched her anymore, how he stayed late at the office more often, how his compliments came less frequently. Her insecurity turned sharp. She began checking his phone, questioning his schedule, lashing out when he seemed distracted. She threw tantrums when he missed her parties, accused him of comparing her to Emma, which, truthfully, he was. One night, after yet another argument, Sienna screamed that she wasn't some rebound or accessory. But the silence that followed from Charles said more than words ever could. She had won the man, the mansion, and the headlines, but she had no idea how to hold them. The empire Emma built with quiet strength was crumbling in the hands of someone who mistook spotlight for power. And as the walls of the mansion echoed with shallow laughter and slamming doors, Charles found himself haunted by everything he had so carelessly thrown away. The launch of House of Illyria was nothing short of a sensation. With barely a whisper of promotion, Emma unveiled her debut collection of bespoke interior designs in a series of elegantly shot videos and images that felt less like advertisements and more like cinematic love letters to style and soul. Her aesthetic, an exquisite balance of English heritage and contemporary edge, captured hearts instantly. Word of mouth, fueled by the quiet buzz she had built through her viral projects, exploded across social media. Within days, inquiries began pouring in. First came the well-heeled socialites, then the boutique hoteliers, and then, shockingly, the royals. A duchess requested Emma to redesign her countryside estate's reading room. A Hollywood actor ordered custom furnishings for his London flat. Celebrities began posting glimpses of their Illyria-styled homes on Instagram, each one tagged with a simple but powerful hashtag, #designedbyIllyria. Suddenly, Emma was everywhere. She graced the pages of Architectural Digest, Vogue Living, and Tatler, not just for her designs, but for her story, a woman who turned betrayal into brilliance. Still, Emma remained careful with her image. She didn't speak about Charles, didn't fan the gossip flames. Instead, she let her work speak louder. At every high-profile event she attended, whether it was a fashion gala in Milan or an art auction in Chelsea, she wore custom pieces, spoke with quiet conviction, and moved with a grace that made her unforgettable. Clients didn't just want her designs. They wanted to be associated with her rise, to wear a bit of her strength like a badge of honor. But while Emma's star ascended, Charles's empire began to unravel. What had once been a symbol of financial dominance now teetered under the weight of scandal and mismanagement. The beginning of the fall was almost laughably predictable. A wild party hosted by Sienna spiraled out of control, and a viral video surfaced showing a major investor's daughter being mocked by Sienna's entourage. The media pounced. Headlines like "The Fall of the Bennett Brand" and "When Glamour Turns Toxic" dominated business sections. Charles tried to spin it, but the damage was done. Corporate sponsors began pulling out. Stock prices dipped. Whispers among the board hinted at a leadership change. Charles, for the first time in years, found himself cornered. Behind the scenes, Emma had been quietly watching. She wasn't interested in revenge, not in the dramatic sense. She didn't want apologies or tears. What she wanted was control. Through a series of anonymous shell companies and trusted intermediaries, she began buying up small stakes in Charles's firm. It was slow, surgical, and invisible. She knew the business inside and out. She had helped build it from the foundation, and she knew exactly where it would hurt. By the time Charles realized what was happening, Emma's holdings, though not yet controlling, were significant enough to earn her a seat at the table. When she walked into the boardroom for the first time in over a year, dressed in tailored navy silk and carrying a quiet, unreadable expression, the room fell into stunned silence. Charles looked up, unsure whether to stand, speak, or stare. Emma simply nodded and took her place. She wasn't there to ruin him. She was there to remind him, and everyone else, that she had never been just a wife, a shadow, or a name attached to his legacy. She was the architect of it. And now, piece by piece, she was taking it back. Not with noise or spectacle, but with precision, elegance, and the kind of power no scandal could ever touch. The email came on a quiet Thursday morning, nestled between client proposals and vendor invoices. It was from an old acquaintance in real estate, someone Emma had once collaborated with during Charles's early days of property investments. The message was brief, almost cryptic. "Whitmore Estate is quietly entering private sale. Owner in need of fast liquidity. Thought you'd want to know." Emma stared at the screen for several moments, her breath catching. Whitmore Estate, her old home. The place where she'd built a life, loved a man, lost herself, and been cast aside. Now, it was being sold like any other asset in a collapsing portfolio. Her heart didn't twist with bitterness, it pulsed with something calmer, firmer. Not rage. Not vengeance. Purpose. She acted quickly but quietly. Through a trusted agent and a string of anonymous holding companies, Emma began negotiations. She was careful, strategic. She didn't want Charles or the brokers to know who was behind the purchase until every paper was signed. Every term, every clause, was scrutinized. It wasn't about just buying back the property, it was about reclaiming something that had been stolen from her under the guise of love. The moment the deal was finalized and the keys were couriered to her downtown office, Emma sat alone for a while, holding them in her palm like a relic. Silver and weighty. The same keys she once carried on a delicate chain tucked beneath her blouse. When she returned to Whitmore, it was late afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip below the treetops, casting a golden hue across the gravel drive. She didn't announce her arrival. The estate was already empty. Sienna had left months ago, and Charles had moved into a sterile penthouse downtown, the mansion too much of a reminder of everything he had miscalculated. Emma walked through the massive front doors, alone. No staff. No cameras. Just her and the echo of memories that drifted through every corridor like ghosts of another life. She moved from room to room, touching the walls she once painted with care, trailing her fingers along the staircase banister where she used to greet guests. In the master bedroom, sunlight streamed across the floorboards where she had once danced barefoot while Charles slept. The study still held the faint scent of old books and cedar, the place where she had stayed up late editing business plans while her husband took the credit. In each space, a memory flickered. Painful, yes. But also powerful. This wasn't a place of her downfall. It was the crucible that had forged the woman she had become. Emma didn't cry. She simply breathed. The mansion no longer held power over her, it was hers again. Entirely, quietly, fully. Not as a wife trying to please, but as a woman who had found her voice, her value, and her vengeance dressed in grace. This wasn't about Charles. It never truly was. This was about Emma buying back her life, not to relive it, but to rewrite it, one room at a time. On the evening of the gala, the Whitmore estate buzzed with the usual extravagant energy. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering light over elegantly dressed guests who sipped champagne and exchanged whispers, unaware that the true drama of the night was yet to unfold. Sienna, radiant in a daring red gown that sparkled beneath the high ceilings, flitted from group to group, basking in the attention as the self-proclaimed queen of the mansion. The music pulsed through the grand halls, laughter ringing out with careless abandon. Yet, beneath her confident smile, a flicker of unease tugged at her, a whisper in the back of her mind that tonight might not be just another party. Meanwhile, a sleek black car approached the estate gates, its driver pausing briefly. The iron gates, usually guarded by indifferent security, swung open without hesitation. The staff, long loyal to Emma, who had once ruled this home with quiet grace, recognized the familiar presence and ushered her inside with respectful nods. Emma stepped out, her silhouette framed by the warm glow of the mansion's exterior lights. She wore a tailored navy velvet blazer over a sleek black dress, her hair swept back in effortless elegance. Her eyes, calm and unwavering, scanned the familiar space that had once been hers but was now filled with strangers. No words were spoken as she crossed the threshold, but the air shifted palpably. The invisible current of power had changed hands. Inside, the music seemed to falter for a heartbeat as all eyes turned toward the entrance. Conversations stuttered and stopped. The room, packed with London's most fashionable and influential, fell into a stunned hush. Emma walked steadily down the grand staircase, her presence magnetic and commanding. Every step was measured, every glance deliberate. She was no longer the woman who had been discarded and humiliated months ago. She was untouchable, an icon of resilience and refined power. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, whispers of disbelief mixing with admiration. Cameras discreetly shifted focus, capturing her entrance not as a guest, but as the rightful owner. Charles was at the far end of the room, his posture stiffening as he caught sight of her. His confident smile faltered, eyes narrowing. Before he could move, Emma was already approaching, her footsteps echoing through the cavernous hall. She stopped just inches from him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Charles," she said softly, but with unmistakable authority. "I see you've been hosting quite the soiree." He attempted a smirk, but it quickly faded. "Emma," he replied, voice tight. "I didn't expect you here." There was an edge of desperation beneath his usual coldness. "This isn't your home anymore." Emma's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Actually, it is. I bought the mansion weeks ago, anonymously, of course. It's official now. The Whitmore estate belongs to me." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "And that's not all." Her voice grew firmer. "Through strategic acquisitions, I own nearly half of your company as well. You might want to check your portfolio, Charles." A ripple of gasps spread through the guests. Eyes darted between Charles and Emma, sensing the seismic shift beneath the glittering surface. Sienna, who had been standing nearby, pale and wide-eyed, realized the gravity of the moment. Her confident facade crumbled as she took a step back, then another. Her voice trembled as she demanded, "What are you doing here? You can't just waltz back in and take everything." Emma's gaze locked onto Sienna with quiet steel. "I'm not here to argue." She turned to the guests, who were now applauding, slowly at first, then swelling into a thunderous ovation. Emma nodded graciously, accepting their recognition with a regal poise. Sienna, overwhelmed and exposed, fled through the grand doors, her heels clicking erratically as she disappeared into the night. Charles stood frozen, the reality crashing down around him. Emma had returned, not as the wronged wife, but as the woman who had risen from ashes to claim what was rightfully hers. The crowd's applause echoed, celebrating not just the reclamation of a mansion, but the return of the true queen. In the soft glow of an early summer afternoon, the gardens of the Whitmore estate bloomed in full splendor. Vibrant roses, delicate lavender, and towering oaks created a serene backdrop for an event that felt both intimate and monumental. Today, Emma stood before a carefully arranged podium adorned with fresh flowers, flanked by a gathering of journalists, influencers, and young women eager to witness the next chapter of her journey. Her presence radiated calm confidence, a far cry from the shattered woman who had once been cast out of this very estate. The crisp navy suit she wore reflected not only her refined taste but the strength she now embodied. With poised clarity, Emma began speaking about her new initiative, the Alira Foundation, a design and entrepreneurship fund aimed at empowering young women to pursue their creative passions and launch their own businesses. This foundation, she explained, is built on the belief that every woman deserves the opportunity to rise, to create, and to lead with purpose. We provide mentorship, funding, and resources to help women transform their ideas into realities. Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, many of whom had followed her story from the beginning. She spoke not from a place of bitterness or revenge, but from a well of hard-earned wisdom and hope. Emma chose her words carefully, never mentioning Charles by name, but acknowledging the trials that had shaped her. Life's challenges can either define us or refine us, she said softly. I am grateful for every difficult moment that taught me resilience, courage, and self-worth. It is those lessons that fuel my passion to support others on their own journeys. The applause was warm and genuine, a testament to the authenticity that shone through her message. After answering questions and sharing plans for upcoming projects, Emma mingled with attendees, her genuine smile inspiring many to approach her with stories of their own struggles and dreams. Later that afternoon, away from the flashing cameras and applause, Emma made her way to a quiet cemetery nestled in the nearby countryside. The familiar path led her to a modest granite headstone, weathered by time but steadfast, a tribute to her grandmother, Alira, whose name now graced the foundation. Kneeling, Emma brushed a stray leaf from the stone and placed a bouquet of freshly picked wildflowers at its base. The memories of afternoons spent in this garden, listening to her grandmother's stories of strength, grace, and kindness, washed over her. With tears glistening but her voice steady, Emma whispered a promise to the woman who had inspired so much of her life. I will honor your legacy, Grandma. Not just in design, but in heart. I will carry forward your strength and your love, building a future worthy of your faith in me. Rising, she took a deep breath, feeling the weight of past sorrows lift, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. The wind rustled through the trees, as if carrying her vow into the very fabric of the earth. Emma walked back to her car with a serene smile. She was no longer defined by what she had lost but by what she was building, her own empire of creativity, compassion, and empowerment. The journey had been painful, but it had led her to a place of healing, where every ending was simply a new beginning. 1 year had passed since Emma reclaimed the Whitmore estate and, with it, her life. The once silent mansion now thrummed with energy and purpose, its grand halls transformed into a vibrant creative headquarters for House of Alira. Designers, artisans, and entrepreneurs moved through its rooms with purposeful strides, collaborating and innovating beneath the vaulted ceilings where once only silence had reigned. The estate had also become a celebrated venue for charity galas and community events, a symbol of Emma's commitment to giving back and empowering others. From its restored gardens to its sunlit studios, the mansion stood as a testament to reinvention, a place where legacy was not simply preserved but actively rewritten. Emma herself had evolved far beyond the shy, overlooked wife who had been cast aside. Now the CEO of a thriving design empire, she was regularly featured in the UK's most prestigious business publications, recognized as one of the country's most powerful women. Her influence extended beyond interior design. She was a sought-after speaker at international forums on women's leadership and entrepreneurship. Despite her skyrocketing fame, Emma remained grounded, her trademark humility matched only by her fierce dedication to nurturing emerging talent through the Alira Foundation. The empire she built was not just about aesthetics, it was about creating spaces where dreams could grow, and where women could find their voices. Across town, in a stark contrast to the life Emma had fashioned, Charles occupied a sleek, minimalist penthouse overlooking the London skyline. The view was breathtaking, but the space felt cold and empty. No laughter echoed through the halls, no footsteps hurried through the marble corridors. Alone, he sat by a large window, a copy of Financial Times unfolded before him. The headline screamed Emma's latest achievement, Emma Alira, redefining luxury, reclaiming power. His eyes scanned the article, reading about her newest project, a partnership with a royal trust, and the Foundation's latest scholarship program. A pang of something unfamiliar tightened in his chest, regret, perhaps, or the bitter taste of loss. He reflected on the past, the way he had thrown Emma out, convinced she was replaceable, a mere accessory to his life and business. Yet, as he turned the pages of the paper, the truth became undeniable. She was not just a footnote or a chapter in his story. She was the story. The very empire he had once claimed as his own had been built, in no small part, by the woman he had tried to erase. The realization weighed heavily on him, mingled with the loneliness that had seeped into his days and nights. Meanwhile, Emma stood on the terrace of the Whitmore estate, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and rose. The gentle breeze carried the scents of blooming jasmine and freshly cut grass. She held a glass of champagne, savoring the quiet triumph that surrounded her. Her mind drifted back to all that had happened, the pain, the struggle, the relentless determination that had carried her through. And then she spoke aloud, her voice steady and clear, carrying over the gardens. He threw me out thinking I was replaceable. But I wasn't just the woman behind his empire, I was the empire. In that moment, Emma was more than a survivor or a victor. She was a force of nature, a living testament to resilience and reinvention. The mansion behind her, the empire before her, and the future unfolding like a canvas waiting to be painted, this was her legacy. And it was hers alone.